Hello guys, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Josie and I make videos about strange and unexplained phenomena. I'm currently working on a series about the Montauk Project, which is probably why you subscribe to me, most likely, I don't know. But I'm also a science fiction author and I wanted to make a video today reading the first chapter of my science fiction novel, Finding Annevra, because I know a few people were interested in that, and on my TikTok I have gotten some comments of people being a little confused about what it's about and if it's like fiction or not. So I wanted to read the first chapter, and I will say, just to give you an overview of it, it's about a fictional lost civilization, and it tells the story of a group of 3 friends that are somehow connected to this lost civilization in the present day, and they all have a range of psychic abilities. So it's kind of like a more grown-up Stranger Things, but it is a young adult novel. And if you are more of a reader of like adult science fiction and you really like an action-oriented story, you might not enjoy this book, just being completely honest. I've described it as a cross between Stranger Things and a Cinderella story. I think that perfectly epitomizes this novel. Finding Annevra is book 1 in the Lucy Devine series. Lucy Devine is my main character. She's 17 years old and she is a little bit of a misfit, which is totally relatable to me because growing up in high school, I was definitely not one of the people that fit in, and in retrospect, I'm kind of glad I was like that because I am who I am today because of it. So yeah, without further ado, I will get into it. The stars felt like my only companion tonight. I sat in the passenger seat of my sister's silver SUV, the air conditioner cranked to the point that I was starting to shiver. I zipped my hoodie all the way up, crossing my arms over my chest, and turned my head to look out the window. The interior was shrouded in darkness aside from the glowing lights on the dash, the atmosphere silent apart from the low drone of the radio. Minutes dragged into hours. I caught the shadowy silhouette of the figure in the driver's seat in my peripheral vision every once in a while, my only reminder that there was another living, breathing human being next to me. Gleaming street lights cast an ugly yellow glow that flooded the interior of the car in brief intervals once we got on the expressway. It was during one of those moments that I caught a glimpse of my sister's expression. Tired. Irritated. We'd had a brief conversation when she first picked me up, but I quickly realized the inevitable. Neither she nor I were going to pretend. I didn't want to be here, and she didn't want me here. I was merely a burden that would serve to complicate her life for the next couple of weeks. I kept silent track of the exits all the while, painfully aware of how far I was getting from home while simultaneously growing closer to the one place I wanted to go least in the world. I kept my gaze out the window, trying to shut the thoughts out. But if I wasn't going to dwell on that, the hour I'd spent crying in my room as I finished packing would do. A sour, heavy feeling entered my stomach as the scene replayed in my head. All of the efforts I'd made to not end up in this situation had been in vain. The car pulled into the driveway of a contemporary-looking 2-story house as I was teetering on the verge of sleep. Though it was dark, its beige siding and white shutters could be made out in the illumination from the porch light. Its appearance was innocent enough, but our arrival signaled a dire finality within me. Finally, Adele sighed. Grab your stuff. A moment later, she was out of the driver's seat, her door slamming shut behind her. I got out on the passenger's side, half stepping and half jumping to the ground from the awkward height at which the car sat. I walked around to the trunk to retrieve my suitcase. Adele stood just inside the front door as I lugged my suitcase up the stone walkway, feeling the weight of her gaze on me the entire time. I crossed the threshold of the front door and stared in confusion as she stood idly, making no move to show me further into the house. Well, she said, I have to help with some last-minute stuff for the wedding, so I'll be going out for a while. The guest room is the first door upstairs on the right. There are leftovers in the fridge if you're hungry, but don't leave a mess. Oh, and I'd prefer if you don't wander around. Anger fused with the dread surging in my stomach. I'd been so caught up in my resentment towards coming here that I'd completely forgotten about the wedding. But I would worry about that later. At the moment, I had a much more pressing issue to deal with. Do you expect me to stay locked in one room? I asked. Our second conversation of my entire trip, if you could even call it that, and I was already standing there exasperated. While I'm not here, yes. She paused. And when I am here too, come to think of it. My anger became a fire in my blood. I wanted to argue, to slap the ugly smirk right off Adele's face, and yet my words caught in my throat. My hands stayed at my sides. With all the dignity I could muster up, I walked to the stairs with my suitcase. As I lugged it up the stairs, I heard the front door shut quietly behind me. Time and distance could be cruel in the way that they seem to distort your feelings about someone. Before Adele had picked me up this evening, once I'd accepted absolute defeat and winning the battle to stay home while our parents went away, I'd been entertaining the idea that maybe this wouldn't be as bad as I was anticipating. That sliver of hope had gone out the window about 2 hours ago. In fact, this was so far worse than what I'd been expecting, and my bar was set pretty low. I dropped my suitcase on the floor the second I entered the rightmost door upstairs, hoping it would scuff the polished wooden panels. There was one twin-sized bed against the wall with a light blue comforter draped over it and a white dresser adjacent to the bed, to the right of the single window in the room framed by white curtains. The furniture was simple and quaint, although I hated to admit, even within the confines of my own mind, that anything in this house resembled some semblance of taste. Other than those few objects, there was a nightstand next to the bed. On top of the nightstand was a lamp with a blue shade and a white stand in the shape of a seashell. I tried not to think about the fact that this would be my home for the next 2 weeks. A yawn escaped my mouth. Standing here alone in my room, I realized how exhausted I actually was. My limbs felt heavy, and my anxious thoughts had begun to slow. I'd been hungry before Adele picked me up, but the gnawing sensation had been swallowed by my nerves the moment I got in the car and had yet to resurface. I got changed and washed up, deciding I might as well go to bed. Phone in hand, I laid down. I peered at the screen to find a text message from my best friend Coda awaiting me. "Miss you, Divs," it read. "Miss you too. Pray for me," I sent back. My eyes opened and closed a few times, but sleep didn't come as easily as I thought it would. Instead, I began to diffuse from the cocktail of resentment and anxiety that had plagued me throughout this entire day. I could feel the pent-up emotion beginning to roll off me in waves, my limbs vibrating with relief at the opportunity to finally relax. If only I'd been born a normal child, I could have been home right now, beginning my summer vacation at a friend's house rather than under the sneering and dictatorial supervision of my sister. My stomach churned as the thoughts once again became a whirlwind in my mind. My phone buzzed on my chest, taking me back into the present. "How'd the ride go, honey? Call us," the message read, lit up in a light blue bubble on my home screen. I glared at the message. For a minute I laid there, contemplating whether I wanted to call or send a text saying something along the lines of that I would call tomorrow. I sighed, realizing it would be best to just get it over with, and pressed on my contacts, scrolling down to my dad's number. I pressed the call button and lifted my phone to my ear. Only when I heard a voice on the other end did I inhale, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. "Hello? Lucy?" my father answered. "Hi, Dad. I'm here." "That's great, honey. You had no problems on the ride over?" he asked. I could hear my mother in the background asking my father the same question. "No, everything went fine," I said shortly, making zero effort to hide the agitation in my tone. "Cheer up, Lucy. I don't see what's so bad. She doesn't want to see me, even more than I don't want to see her," I snapped, as if picking up right where the argument had left off earlier this morning. "She seemed fine when she picked you up." "Yeah, because she was kissing up to you guys like she always does. What's new?" My father sighed, pausing a moment before he replied. "I'm getting really sick of this attitude, Lucy. Oh, but it's okay for her to call me a freak and lock me in my bedroom, right?" I was well aware that that was an exaggeration, but my temper deemed my behavior perfectly rational at the moment. "What are you talking about?" "Adele, your perfect daughter," I exclaimed. "She left the second we got here and told me to stay in my room while she's gone. Yeah, Dad, let me tell you, I'm having so much fun here." A hot tear rolled down my cheek, despite my earlier resolve not to cry over this again. "She probably just said that because you're unfamiliar with the house." "No! This isn't fair!" I snapped, in disbelief for probably the 100th time at just how oblivious, or maybe just biased, my parents could be. "Don't try to justify her. I've spent almost my entire life trying to prove to you and Mom that there's nothing wrong with me, but nothing that I do will ever be good enough. I should just accept it and stop wasting my time. But me and Adele will never get along. Never. She made sure of that years ago. And I know your wishful thinking about us getting along one day isn't why you sent me here anyway. So stop lying." I hung up the phone before my father could respond, my chest rising and falling rapidly with each shallow breath. A couple more tears streaked down my cheeks. As my anger faded, fear set in at the inevitable consequences of my outburst. And yet, the more I thought about it, I felt strangely immune with the knowledge that my parents were about to board a flight to Europe and had already condemned me to the worst fate possible. I shut my eyes, hovering for a moment between sleep and awareness, and then my exhaustion overcame me, arresting my consciousness like a thief in the night. When I opened my eyes, sunlight filled the room, filtering in through the blinds. A few strands of hair were stuck to my cheeks, I found, as I ran a hand through my hair. I noticed a slight tacky residue on my skin as I brought my palms up to rub my eyes, attempting to wipe the grogginess away. I blinked a few times as confusion set in. My conversation with my father the night before flooded back to me then, and I realized I must have fallen asleep not long after I hung up the phone. I gazed around, finding the same dull surroundings as the night before. The light tones and general barrenness of the room, now exposed by the sunlight, made the room feel almost clinical, or like a cell. I experienced a brief moment of disappointment that it hadn't all been a bad dream. "Lucy, I hope you're up. It's almost noon. We have to get going soon," yelled a voice outside my door, accompanied by a sharp, enduring knock. I lifted my hands, pressing them on my face for a moment, and then used the inside of my elbow to stifle a groan. I went to check the time on my phone and simultaneously noticed the single unread text message awaiting me. "One more outburst like that, and you're grounded for the rest of the summer," it read. I felt a pang of irritation as I read it, but it was quick to dissolve into that same sense of numbness I had already felt towards any potential consequences of my outburst the night before. Right now, Adele was much more real to me and much more of a threat than anything my parents could say. I peeked at the digital time display before placing my phone back on my nightstand. 10:35 a.m. Hardly noon. I rose from my bed begrudgingly, not wanting to give Adele any more reason to yell this morning, and went to my suitcase to retrieve an outfit to wear. It took me about a minute to decide on a pair of denim shorts and a black t-shirt with a band logo on it. I walked to the bathroom to get washed up, only to find Adele already occupying it. She stood in front of the mirror, her hair straightened to perfection and a generous amount of makeup on. For what occasion, I had no idea. It was a Saturday, so she was off from work today, and her friend's wedding wasn't for another few days if I wasn't mistaken. She continued to stand there, fixated on getting one strand of hair to sit perfectly while pursing her lips. I fought the urge to gag. A moment later, she walked out of the bathroom, nearly knocking me in the shoulder as she went. "Be down in a few minutes. We're eating breakfast, and then we have to get your dress for the wedding." She started down the hall as realization and a fresh bout of dread rippled through me. I washed up and brushed my hair, and afterward faced my reflection in the mirror. My eyes still appeared a little groggy, though I suspected there was nothing I could do about that, and my blonde hair fell kind of flat from where it was parted in the middle of my head. In my book, my appearance was adequate, and any doubts I did have were quickly whisked away by the fact that I didn't even want to go to this stupid wedding. The thought of attending any formal event with Adele made my stomach turn, especially knowing that our parents wouldn't be there to act as a buffer. And yet, I understood that that was wishful thinking at best. This event in particular was the perfect opportunity for my sister's ego to run wild, seeing as she was the bride's maid of honor. The fact that anybody would make Adele their maid of honor baffled me. That alone made me even less enthusiastic than I already was to meet the bride. I walked back to my room and observed the clothing I'd mindlessly left on the floor while finding an outfit. I picked up the pile, trying not to mess up what remained folded, and walked to the dresser. Upon opening the top drawer, I was startled to find a small object already occupying it. A black velvet box, the kind that might hold a piece of jewelry. Had somebody stayed in this room before me? Where had it come from? I put the clothes down and lifted it carefully, opening the lid. A red pendant gleamed up at me, attached to a thin gold chain. A chill ran through me as I examined it. There was nothing outwardly strange about it, but it had the look of one of those necklaces you might find at a crystal shop. The pendant was cylindrical and pointed at the bottom. Definitely not a style of jewelry Adele would be interested in. And yet, if it wasn't hers, where had it come from? My eyes had just enough time to take in its surface details before my consciousness began to ebb. Resistance towards what I knew was happening welled up inside me. A blurry image came to mind, sharpening as moments passed. I no longer saw my bedroom, and yet my feet remained firmly on the ground. I was helpless to stop it. I let it take me. A man sat on a stool in the center of the room, wearing a white lab coat. His dark hair was in slight disarray, his face displaying early signs of age, and his eyes, though gentle, were exhausted. He peered down at his clipboard and then looked at the child sitting before him at a long wooden table. A row of white cabinets and a long counter lined the back wall, as well as what looked to be anatomical and medical-related charts here and there, giving the room a strange feel between a classroom and a doctor's office. A small device, rectangular and silver in color, with a series of black buttons on one side, as well as a necklace with a red pendant on top of a folded white cloth, sat on the table between them. The man exhaled, glancing down at his clipboard one more time. Your target is going to be a little different this time, sweetheart. You're going to focus on this object and describe to me, as best as you can, where it came from. He pointed to the necklace sitting between himself and the young girl. She nodded, her blonde bangs bobbing with the movement. I like the experience with Addie better, she said, a playful edge to her tone. The man chuckled, a grin cracking his stern expression. Don't we all, he said, mostly to himself. Are you ready? The little girl nodded. Can I go home after? She asked, a hopeful smile popping onto her lips. The man paused as if to choose his words carefully, a troubled look entering his eyes. Soon, I promise. He trained his eyes on the table between them. Ready? For the second time she nodded, this time remaining silent. The man pressed a button on the tiny silver device and began speaking towards it. Today is November 22nd, 2005. Project Blue Umbrella. Subject is CT4. Session 8-4. Session target is to locate the origin of an artifact. Method is remote viewing. Time is 1400 hours. Session will now begin. The child took the necklace in one hand. She shut her eyes and concentrated a moment. Do you mean on Earth? She asked. Her eyes remained closed. She tilted her head to the side thoughtfully. The man's eyes popped open wide. I suppose, he stammered. He adjusted his tie and turned his gaze back to his clipboard, as if suddenly deep in thought. No, you're not limited. Describe to me wherever you see that it came from, no matter where that is. She nodded. I see 2 people. They look weird, she said, giggling. He narrowed his eyes at her. Weird how? They have bright silver hair. He'd begun scribbling notes down. Describe them in more detail, please, the best you can. He stopped writing a moment, his eyes concerned and yet poised, and waited for her to continue. She shut her eyes tighter, her entire face scrunching up with the effort. Relax, the man said, a grim smile crossing his lips. Her expression softened. They're wearing black clothes with lines running through them. Like stripes? No, the lines don't go down all the way or across all the way. They kind of go in squares. They're thin and bright blue. They're glowing, like a light that's turned on. Like they're electric? The man gazed at the child in bewilderment. Yeah, kind of. I told you they're weird, she giggled. Okay, now where are they? They're standing outside an opening in a big rock. There's a lot of trees. It's very green. Like a rainforest? She hesitated a moment and then nodded. Mm-hmm. And is it a man and a woman? 2 men? I don't know. They both have long hair. That's okay. What are they doing? They're getting on a small flying thing like her tone became slightly frustrated. Like one of those things you use in the ocean, that's what it looks like. They're flying into the opening. Some parts are wide and others are really small and they almost can't fit. Oh. They're in a big area, but it's dark. Her tone grew quiet. They stopped. One of them is holding a circle that's glowing bright, lighting up the whole area. They're looking at the walls in front of them. Is there any distinguishing reason why they might be doing this? Oh, I can see it now. The walls are red, like the necklace. The whole room is red. Ah. The man nodded, continuing to take notes on his clipboard. And is there anything you can tell me beyond their immediate location? You said this planet isn't Earth? Oh no, she said. She paused a moment, her features scrunching up in concentration once again. Then, with an air as if it was the most obvious fact in the world, she declared, This planet doesn't exist anymore, silly. The man's hand froze in mid-sentence. His eyes opened wide simultaneously and then narrowed. What do you mean? He asked, his voice brusque. It got smashed apart somehow, she exclaimed. Do you know what it was called? Anything? Do you know when this happened? She froze, her lips contorting into a frown. I don't know. I'm getting really tired. Her eyes popped open. The man nodded, his critical expression softening. We'll continue tomorrow, he said. In a mechanical manner, he reached a hand out and pulled the tiny silver device in the center of the table towards him. He glanced at his watch and spoke into it curtly. The time is now 14:12. Session is over. He pressed one of the black buttons on its side as he'd done earlier. The young girl was already out of her chair, standing by the door. The man stored the necklace and the white cloth it was on in a small black pouch, slipping it into his pocket, and gathered up his few other belongings. Meeting her by the door, he placed a hand on the small of her back and led her out of the room. The box slipped through my fingers and fell to the floor. My eyes displayed my sunlit bedroom again, but my sight kind of wavered as my heart descended into a frantic state, pounding in my chest. The weight of the realizations I was having seemed to press all of the air out of my lungs at once, and I took in rapid, sporadic breaths. I barely had a moment to process what I'd seen, but that was all I needed to understand one chilling aspect of my vision. The child in it looked exactly like me, and sounded exactly like me, down to the slight lisp I'd had as a kid. All of that would have been fine, I suppose. I'd become rather accustomed to reality-shattering phenomenon in my life. If only I could remember the situation happening. Yet, as hard as I tried, I couldn't. And something told me it wasn't a lapse in my memory that was causing my lack of recollection, considering the fact that the man I'd, or she'd, been speaking to was a stranger to me. As moments passed, I was both equally convinced the child was me because of her splitting image resemblance to me, down to her mannerisms and lisp, and at the same time just as convinced she couldn't possibly be me. If she was, wouldn't I have remembered the situation taking place and been able to make sense of my strange surroundings, and known who the man was whom I was speaking to? The gears went into overdrive in my mind, but the only conclusion I managed to come to was that none of this made sense. A violent chill ran down my spine as I continued to contemplate it. I couldn't handle standing there alone in my room any longer. I grabbed the box from the floor, snapped it shut, and bolted out of my room. I hurried down the stairs, rounding the corner immediately to my left once I reached the bottom, which I knew led into the kitchen. I stopped abruptly, midway between the island counter and the entrance, when I noticed an additional presence sitting at the counter next to Adele. The two women both jumped in their seats as I entered, startled, and stopped speaking mid-conversation. Both of their eyes whipped around to scrutinize me. I crossed my arms over my chest, attempting to conceal the small black box inside my elbow as completely as I could. I wasn't sure what I'd been planning to do. All I knew moments earlier was that I was too spooked and to hang out alone in my bedroom any longer. I wanted to give the necklace to Adele and let it be her problem, and possibly try to fish out some answers in regards to whose it was and how it came to be in my dresser, but the unexpected guest discouraged me from that. I knew that I was bound to face some criticism from Adele for spooking the both of them with my less than smooth entrance, and presenting the necklace to her right now would no doubt only inspire an avalanche of more criticism, especially if by some miracle she'd never seen it before. I resolved that it would be best to wait until her friend left to give it to her. Her guest had curly dark hair that framed her face pleasantly, and unlike Adele, she regarded me with a warm, almost excited smile. Adele snickered and said, "You see a ghost or something loose?" I glared at her. I straightened up, letting my arms fall to my sides and closing my hand as much as possible around the jewelry box, attempting to conceal it against my thigh. Before I could respond, her friend started talking. "Lucy! Hi! Look at how grown up you are!" I looked back at her, examining her face more closely. I could swear I'd never met her before. A wave of confusion came over me. Hi? You don't remember me? I'm Irene. You're going to her wedding, for God's sake, Adele chided. Wait, Irene. The light bulb went off then. Like the one who used to live a block over from us, I asked. The brunette nodded, a broad smile on her lips. Yes, you're coming to my wedding, silly. You didn't realize your sister was talking about me? No, I stammered. I'm sorry. I could feel the tips of my ears growing hot. Adele, as far as I could recall, hadn't mentioned the name of her friend whose wedding it was. I distinctly remembered her and I sitting around the dining room table with our parents during Christmas dinner 6 months earlier, when they announced they'd be dumping me off at her place for 2 weeks, starting at the very beginning of my summer vacation this upcoming year. Merry Christmas! Especially to me. She gaped at them as if they just announced they'd taken her out of the will or something. I have a wedding to go to that week, she'd snapped. Well, make your arrangements. You can bring a guest, can't you? Our mother had said coolly. Her words had immediately brought Adele's last failed relationship to my mind, and I was sure to everyone else's also. It had ended about 3 months prior, and as far as I knew, she hadn't dated since. Then again, I really wasn't privy to anything going on in Adele's life, especially since she moved out when she began college 8 years ago. Whether she'd moved on or was still heartbroken, I was none the wiser. With the way she was treating me, I was beginning to suspect that I had taken the place of some potential date she'd been planning to bring, and was now taking it out on me. If that was the case, I would have gladly volunteered to opt out of the wedding so whatever poor, unfortunate soul could spend the night with her. But I'd never get so lucky. Yeah? Fine. Guess Lucy's gonna be my +1, Adele had said hotly, her gaze swinging around to glare at me as if I was the one orchestrating this. I stayed silent, merely returning her glare with one of those smiles that looks more like you're in pain than anything else. Our parents had been oblivious to this little exchange, or maybe had just chosen not to acknowledge it, and that had been the extent of the conversation. Back in the present, I tried to remember the last time I'd seen Irene. I racked my brain, but the answer eluded me. I barely even remembered her family moving. It had to be more than a decade, I deduced, because I was sure when I was 7 that she hadn't been around for years at least. It must have been 12, maybe 13 years ago. Well, it's nice to see you after all this time, I said, merely because I didn't know what else to say. It's nice to see you too. Are you excited to be coming to my wedding? She asked. Of course, I lied. Congrats, by the way. Aw, Lucy, thank you. She gave me an overly sweet smile, and her tone reminded me of the way someone might regard a small animal or a baby. It made me feel squeamish, so I was grateful when, a moment later, Adele and Irene turned their attention away from me and resumed the conversation they'd been having before I came downstairs. I crossed the room in the direction of the full, steaming coffee pot on the counter, reflecting on the fact that I had been up for a mere 20 minutes and had already had too many surprises for one day. The necklace was still concealed at my side, and I figured I would excuse myself and put it back upstairs once I made myself a cup of coffee. Ironically, I was grateful for the slight chaos of seeing Irene again after all these years. It had prevented Adele from noticing the conspicuous black box in my hand. I found a mug in the cabinet directly above the coffee pot and was glad I didn't have to search all over the kitchen to find one. As I stirred sugar into my coffee, it occurred to me that I'd finally come face to face with the person deranged enough to make Adele their maid of honor. I'd expected to have a reaction of pity, but instead, my mind felt like it had been thrown through the ringer. Not only was the enigmatic vision I had still hanging over my head, but I now felt almost like I'd seen a ghost. I wondered when and how Adele got back in contact with Irene after all these years. They had been best friends when we were kids. That I did remember, so I suppose that if they lived nearby each other these days, it only made sense that they would get back in contact. I, on the other hand, must have been 4 or 5 when Irene's family moved, and their existence had evaded my mind ever since. I turned from the counter with my steaming mug. As I turned, the sound of the screen door in the next room opening and thwacking shut sent a wave of confusion through me. Did Adele have more friends that I didn't want to meet coming dress shopping with us? I could admit that Irene at least seemed nice, which made her relationship with my sister that much more enigmatic, but I was sure it was only a matter of time before I started meeting members of the Mean Girl squad. And yet, my mind deceived me. A young man entered the kitchen, tall and dark-haired. His expression was bright and poised. "Hello, ladies," he said, walking towards the island. The blood in my veins became ice cold as I fully took in his appearance. There was a loud clank, accompanied by a wet, burning sensation that flooded and spread across the bottoms of my feet. The mug of steaming hot coffee now lay empty on the floor along with its contents, the small velvet box sitting in the center of the puddle, now soaked. Alright guys, so that was chapter 1 of my science fiction novel, Finding Annevra. If you did enjoy this and you are interested in hearing chapter 2, I will definitely make that video next week, so let me know in the comments if you enjoyed and you're interested to hear more. And beyond that, if people are really liking this format of being able to hear the book and experience it, I'm thinking about maybe making a Patreon where you can purchase the chapters for maybe like 50 cents to $1, or maybe purchase them all together for like $2.99, which is the price of the ebook. I'll have to figure out what's fair and figure out how to use Patreon because I've never used it before, so you know, I'll think about that down the road. Thanks so much for watching, and just so you know, part 2 of my Montauk Project series will be coming out on Friday. I really appreciate all the support so far. I can't believe at the time that I'm making this video, I almost have 500 subscribers. That blows my mind, so thanks again, guys, and thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video.